Tonight, we are not visiting the Rome of emperors, marble triumphs, and impossible crowds. We are slipping instead into a smaller Rome, a narrower Rome, a Rome of damp stone, bell towers, smoky kitchens, and tired people who live among the bones of a world they no longer fully remember. If you let your mind settle for a moment, you can feel the city before you understand it. There is the faint grit of dust under bare feet. There is a ribbon of pale morning light at a shutter. There is the smell of last night's fire still sleeping in the beams overhead. And somewhere, before the street is truly awake, a bell sends one low bronze note into the dark, like a hand gently touching your shoulder. So, before we begin, make yourself comfortable in whatever century you happen to belong to. Let the room around you soften. Let your breathing take its time. If this kind of slow wandering through history becomes a place you like to return to, you already know the small ways to find your way back here. For now, though, there is nothing to do but follow the morning. You open your eyes in Rome in the year 1200, and the first surprise is how little the city resembles the Rome that still lives in modern imagination. There are no broad imperial avenues full of senators and statues, no endless procession of polished marble certainty. The room around you is modest enough that the word modest feels generous. The walls are rough, the floor is cool and faintly sandy. Your bed is not a bed as a modern person would mean it, but a stuffed pallet laid on a simple frame, or perhaps directly on planks. Your blanket is heavy wool, useful in winter, itchy in all seasons, and trusted because there is nothing else. Through the one small opening in the wall comes the grey beginning of day, and with it the layered smell of a city that lives very close to itself. There is smoke first, because nearly every household cooks with wood or charcoal, and the scents of many small fires gather in the alleys before they have anywhere to go. There is dampness second, the mineral dampness of old masonry that has known centuries of rain, flood, repair, neglect, and reuse. Beneath that are fainter household notes: stale wine, yesterday's soup, wet cloth, tallow, leather, human sleep. None of it is unusual. That is perhaps the strangest part. Nothing here announces itself as ruin. Nothing says, "Look, this was once the centre of the world." It simply feels inhabited, worn, improvised, and old in the way that old things become ordinary if you are born among them. The light grows a little stronger. Somewhere below, someone is already awake enough to argue with a stubborn animal or a stubborn child. Somewhere farther off, a woman beats cloth against stone with the patient violence that laundry requires. Somewhere nearer still, another bell answers the first one, and then another, as if the city is waking not by clock or schedule, but by echo. You sit up slowly, pull your tunic over your head, and become aware at once of how closely medieval life presses bodies together. You are not alone in this room. You may share it with kin, with a child, with an apprentice, with whoever fits inside the practical math of household life. Privacy, in the modern sense, is thin here. Curtains do little. Walls are shared. Sound travels. Lives overlap. And yet, at first waking stillness is real. It belongs to you for a little while, a small island, before the day begins asking things of your hands. Your feet, your stomach, your patience, and your faith. Outside the window, the sky is the colour of old pewter. Rome has not yet become loud. It is only gathering itself. And as you stand, dress, and prepare to descend into the street, the city is doing the same thing around you. One workshop, one bell, one threshold at a time. When you step outside, the city reveals itself in layers rather than all at once. The alley is narrow enough that the buildings on either side seem to lean toward one another in secret conversation. Upper stories push outward over timber, supports to steal a little more space from the air, which means the morning sky above you appears only as a thin strip of pale blue-grey cloth. Water, or something like water, finds the centre of the lane and moves slowly downhill. A cat watches from a sill with the expression of a creature who has survived more roams than you have. Two children hurry past on some errand that may or may not be an actual errand. Their feet slap stone. Their voices bounce off the walls and are gone. This is the first great truth of Rome in 1200. It is small. Astonishingly, almost impossibly small compared with its ancient shell. Where imperial Rome once held multitudes beyond easy counting, this city now gathers perhaps 30 or 40,000 souls within a space originally shaped for far more. Historians can debate the exact rise and fall of the numbers, and they do, because historians will always do that. But the lived fact is easy to feel. Whole reaches of the old city lie half empty. Ancient districts that once carried dense human noise now hold scrub growth, broken arches, wandering livestock, and memory thin to weather. The inhabited heart has contracted toward the river, toward the markets, toward the churches, toward the places where practical life can still gather enough warmth to continue. As you make your way toward a broader street, the skyline clarifies, and what dominates is not dome after dome in the way many later centuries will imagine Rome, but towers. Family towers, clan towers, stone declarations of pride, suspicion, and readiness. They rise above the roofs in bristling groups, some severe and narrow, others heavier, each one belonging to a web of kinship, patronage, ambition, and grievance. In another age, the city's power announced itself in forums, basilicas, baths, and arches. In this age, it announces itself with vertical watchfulness. A tower says that a family intends to remain visible. It says that if trouble comes, ladders can be pulled up, doors can be barred, stones can be dropped, it says, in the plain language of architecture. This street remembers who controls it. And then there are the churches, so many churches that even a stranger quickly learns to orient by them. Rome may be smaller than it once was, but it rings more densely with holiness. Large basilicas stand among humbler parish churches, the way old oaks stand among courtyard shrubs. Some glow with mosaics and old prestige, some are dark and plain and smell gently of wax and mice. Some are built against ancient walls that once belonged to pagan structures nobody in the neighbourhood bothers to identify with much precision. Some wear columns too grand for their present size, because pieces of older buildings have been borrowed, moved, reset, and made to serve again. Everywhere you look, stone has a previous life. That is another truth of this city. Medieval Rome does not preserve the ancient world as a museum. It lives on top of it, cuts into it, steals from it, leans on it, sleeps inside it, and preys among its leftovers. The best cut stone in town is often the stone a dead empire already paid for. A carved block in a shop wall may once have belonged to a temple. A worn bench in a small square may once have crowned a cornice. Marble columns rise inside churches because someone, long ago or not so long ago, saw no reason to leave excellent material lying idle in a broken monument. The bells swell again, no longer isolated notes, but a broad, irregular field of sound passing over roofs and courtyards. They are not perfectly synchronized, and that somehow makes them gentler. They do not command the morning like a machine, they ripple through it like weather. You do not so much check the time in this city as listen for it. Bronze tells you where you are. Inside the day, bells wake priests. Servants, bakers, widows, labourers, children, and scholars alike. Bells remind you that Rome, however reduced, still beats with an ordered heart. The order may be uneven, it may be contested, it may live beside noise, dirt, and clan quarrels, but it is there. For now, that is enough. It is still early. The city is still stretching into itself. You do not need to hold all of Rome in your mind at once. You only need to keep walking, to let one street open into another, to let one bell lead to the next, and to allow the day to reveal itself at the pace it prefers. As the streets widen by a degree that would barely count as widening anywhere else, the deeper structure of the city begins to show. Rome, in 1200, does not belong neatly to anyone, although several powers would very much like to tell you that it does. In one sense, it is the Pope's city, the seat of the great spiritual machinery of Western Christendom, the place from which letters, judgments, dispensations, commands and appeals radiate outward toward kingdoms that may be far richer or stronger in military terms, but still feel the tug of Roman authority. In another sense, Rome belongs to its Senate, or to the idea of one, because the citizens and noble interests of the city have long memories and a stubborn habit of reviving old forms in new and messy ways. In yet another sense, Rome belongs to its great families, whose towers and retainers make power visible at the level of the street. To an ordinary resident, these distinctions are less theoretical than practical. They determine which streets feel safe this week. They determine whose colours you pretend not to notice. They determine whether a quarrel becomes a hearing, a fine, a brawl, or a feud that will outlive the original insult by 2 generations. The Pope may speak for the whole church, but the baker on your corner worries more immediately about whichever local faction controls the lane where his flour passes. The Senate may claim to represent civic order, but civic order in Rome often depends on whether armed men from rival families have chosen the same hour to occupy the same road. And yet, strangely, the structure ordinary people feel most intimately is not the grand one at all. It is the parish. Ask someone where they are from inside Rome, and they are as likely to answer with the name of a church as with the name of a district. That church is not only where they hear Mass, it is where their marriages become official, where their children are known, where their dead are remembered, where disputes may be softened, where news arrives, where gossip condenses into local truth. A neighbourhood in this city is not merely a set of walls and shops. It is a spiritual enclosure, a little social world, arranged around a doorway, worn smooth by generations of hands. So you turn toward your parish church, not because you are particularly dramatic in your devotion this morning, but because this is where the day begins to make social sense. The building is modest from the street, smaller than many people from later centuries would imagine when they hear the word church. The stone is patched, the timber roof has seen better years, the bell tower stands with more determination than elegance. But inside, it has the gravity of repetition. The floor is uneven from long use. Candles burn low before painted saints whose faces have softened under smoke and time. The air is cool, with that unmistakable church mixture of wax, old wood, damp plaster, incense remembered more than present, and the faint wool smell of neighbours arriving one by one. The priest knows everyone. That is one of the hidden powers of the parish. Its memory is embodied in a man who has baptized half the district, buried the other half, heard confessions from nearly all of them, and can tell you who owes whom money, who married above expectation, who has a son ready for apprenticeship, and whose niece is already the subject of careful conversation. He may not be a great scholar, he may mispronounce his Latin in ways that would trouble a university master. None of that matters very much. His authority here is partly sacramental, yes, but also intimate and administrative. He is one of the living record books of the quarter. Mass in this period is not designed to unfold like a classroom lecture for the laity. Most people understand its broad shape, its repetitions, its responses, the moments of kneeling and standing, the weight of the prayers, the solemn rise of the consecrated host. They do not necessarily grasp every nuance of the Latin words, and they do not expect to. Sacred action matters as much as verbal explanation. Presence matters, habit matters, the feeling that one has entered a known form matters deeply. The mysteries of the altar are not less powerful because they are not analytically parsed. In some ways, they are more powerful for being received with the body before the mind. After Mass, the church changes function without ever really ceasing to be a church. Conversations begin near the door. News trades hands. Rumours arrive in fragments. Grain may be delayed. Someone saw armed men near a rival tower. A cousin's marriage is nearly arranged. A pilgrim band has entered the district. A relic somewhere across the river has acquired new fame. This is the social pulse of the parish at work. One might call it gossip. And it is, one might also call it local governance in its most practical form. Standing there among your neighbours, you feel something that modern urban life often misplaces. The city is large enough to contain many strangers, but your part of it is small enough to keep you legible. You are known here, perhaps too well. Your habits, your household, your absences, your debts, your griefs, your little failings. Even your moods can be read against the memory of the place. It is comforting and claustrophobic in equal measure. But this morning, in the gentle dimness after prayer, with candle smoke thinning upward and bells still travelling across the roofs outside, it feels more comforting than anything else, and eventually, as all spiritual and social mornings do, it gives way to a simpler truth. You are hungry. The stomach always reasserts itself, even in Rome, even beside sanctity, perhaps especially beside sanctity. So you step back out into the day, carrying with you the residue of prayer, the latest neighbourhood news, and a very practical desire for bread. Breakfast is not theatrical in Rome in 1200. That may be one of the reasons it is so easy to imagine. There is no polished ritual to it, no bright arrangement of abundance, no table set for display. What you have instead is weight and usefulness, bread first. Always bread if bread can be had. It is darker, denser, and more determined than most modern bread, made from whatever grain was available at a price the household could manage. You tear it rather than slice it. It resists a little. That resistance is reassuring. A good loaf in this world is not delicate. It is a compact promise that you will still be upright by midday. With it there may be beans from a pot, perhaps left from the previous day, and warmed again. There may be a little cheese, if fortune has tilted kindly. There may be figs, or onions, or a spoonful of something preserved in fat. The drink is often watered wine, because water is never a simple matter, and because habit, like belief, settles into the body over generations. Children drink it too, weak and ordinary, not because anyone is chasing pleasure at dawn, but because the liquid that reaches the table is judged not by purity in a modern sense, but by whether it can be trusted to pass through the body without immediate punishment. The room where this meal happens is not a private dining chamber, but part of the same enclosed life where sleeping, cooking, mending, waiting, coughing, and child-rearing all overlap. A household in Rome is rarely as neat a category as father, mother, and children. It may include kin of uncertain degree, a servant, an apprentice, a widow, a boarder, someone between employments, someone too old to manage alone. someone too young to be elsewhere. The table therefore gathers not merely a family, but a cluster of obligations. People eat in practical silence at first, not out of solemnity, but because the morning has not yet warmed into speech. And then the day begins asking for its real labour. One of the first necessary tasks is water. Here, the ghost of ancient Rome is felt almost painfully. Everyone knows, even if only in fragments, that the city once had more water, better water, and an easier relationship to water than it has now. The old aqueduct lines still stride in broken remnants across parts of the landscape beyond the denser quarters. And within the city itself, one encounters basins, channels, and ruins that clearly belong to a grander hydraulic order. But maintenance is the invisible empire behind every visible empire, and maintenance is what failed. Once the systems weakened, were cut, or simply ceased to be tended with the discipline they required, the miracle thinned into memory. Now water comes from wells, from the river, from a limited handful of surviving flows, from effort. Effort is the key word. A jug filled today must be carried, and in being carried it teaches the body exactly how much civilization has narrowed. In the courtyard, near a common well, people gather with the patience of those who know that waiting is part of living. Rope lowers, buckets strike water, arms pull, clay knocks gently against stone. Conversation passes in brief exchanges, often practical, sometimes slyly observant. Someone comments on the weather, because weather still rules more than policy does. Someone remarks on river level because flood memory never entirely leaves the lower neighbourhoods. Someone complains about a child, a price, a pain in the shoulder, and the complaint is received the way morning complaints always are, half seriously, half as ritual. The water itself may look clear enough until held to the light. It may not. The miracle is less that it is clean than that generations of bodies have learned, imperfectly, to survive what reaches them. Modern disgust would not help you here, only adaptation would. So the jug is carried home, set in a cool place if there is one, and guarded by the knowledge that this water must do many jobs before the next trip. Then comes work, and this is where medieval life, for all its hardships, acquires a rhythm modern people sometimes envy without understanding its price. Work in Rome in 1200 is bodily, repetitive, local, and often visible from the street. You do not disappear into abstraction. You go where your tools are. If you shape leather, your bench, awls, knives, straps, scraps, wax, thread, and small smells of tanning and use are waiting for you. If you hammer iron, the morning announces itself with sparks. If you bake, the district already knows by scent. If you mend, stitch, carve, scrape, or carry, your work announces both itself and your station. The workshop may stand on ancient foundations. This city has that habit. A room opening directly onto the street may once have been part of some forgotten Roman structure before walls shifted, levels rose, and ownership blurred. Nobody around you needs the original identification in order to use the place well. Stone that still stands is simply useful stone. A column that still bears weight is an ally. A vaulted chamber that stays cool in summer is valuable, even if no one can tell you what officials or bathers or priests once moved through it in another age. Medieval Rome is not trying to solve the past. It is trying to live inside what remains of it. There is comfort in the hand, learning a shape so well that the mind can drift while labour continues. Stitch, pull, cut, turn, smooth. Repeat outside. Carts pass when the street allows them. Bells speak in the distance. Somewhere a donkey objects to existence. Somewhere a coppersmith sends bright strikes into the day. You work not with the freedom of a leisurely hobby, but with the steadiness of necessity. Yet necessity can produce its own calm. The hand knows what to do. The body knows how to sit, lean, brace, and continue. And inside that repetition, the day becomes easier to inhabit. Not because it is light, but because it is structured. By the time the sun has risen properly above the roofs, Rome no longer feels like a mystery waiting to be deciphered. Feels like a place already underway, and you, like everyone else around you, have simply joined the movement. Around midday, the city changes texture again. Morning work gives way to movement, and movement gives way to exchange. People step out from workshops, adjust belts and sleeves, lift baskets, count coins, and join the slow, irregular current toward market streets and river edges where Rome's practical life thickens. The great glory of the ancient forums is no longer the center of commerce in any living sense. What matters now are the places where goods can actually be found, weighed, argued over, carried away, and turned into supper. The market does not feel like a cleanly bounded zone. It spills, it leans, it swells outward from useful points. Here, a butcher works beneath an awning, darkened by smoke and years of blood. There, a fish seller arranges his catch with the optimism required of anyone trying to sell river life by noon. Grain, cloth, rope, candles, cheap pottery, onions, garlic, wax, dried legumes, pins, leather scraps, and small necessities all appear in some form. The street itself becomes part stall, part road, part theatre. Bargaining is not a disruption of commerce. It is commerce. Voices rise and fall with the practiced drama of people who know that performance is one of the tools of price. Money circulates, though not with the sleek certainty modern people expect from currency. Coins from different places mingle, values drift, and trust often depends less on official stability than on habit, local knowledge, and the reputations of those involved. A price may be quoted as if fixed only to become elastic within 2 sentences. A seller may lament ruin while already calculating a profitable compromise. A buyer may act injured by an offer that was entirely expected. This too has a rhythm. No one is confused by the fact that exchange includes theatre. Theatre is one of the ways trust is tested. Behind all of this lies a larger fact that almost no resident can afford to ignore. Rome's economy is deeply tied to the church, the papal household, the clerks, messengers, scribes, servants, litigants, petitioners, and religious institutions that gather around the centre of ecclesiastical power pour money into the city in countless small channels. A decision made in a papal chamber may reach the market, not only through law, but through bread purchased, rooms rented, mules shod, parchment cut, candles bought, kitchens supplied, and labour hired. When the papal presence is strong, trade thickens. When the political centre wobbles, the city feels it in its stomach. Pilgrims add another pulse. They come with their own needs and their own coins, sometimes humble and few, sometimes substantial enough to fatten an innkeeper for a season. They require beds, meals, candles, tokens, guidance, stories, and reassurance. The holy city is also, unavoidably, a service economy built around holiness. From the market, your eye is naturally drawn toward the river, because the river is everywhere in the practical imagination of the city. The Tiber is not beautiful in the polished sense, and yet it can be beautiful in the only way that really matters to people who live beside it. It is useful, it moves, it carries, it grinds grain, it receives traffic, it threatens flood, it stinks, it glimmers. It never lets Rome forget that life here is a negotiation with water, not a mastery of it. At the river's edge, The city becomes briefly horizontal. The sky opens a little. Mud, reeds, timbers, moorings, and old stone remains create a rough fringe between built life and moving current. Boats sit low in the water. Men lift sacks. Women wash cloth, with the efficient certainty of those who know both how much labour lies in a garment, and how little sentiment should be wasted on the act of beating it clean. Mill structures creak and turn, using the river's force in ways at once ingenious and fragile. Everywhere there is the sound of wood against wood, rope against wet stone, water against piles, voices carried farther, because the banks do not hold them the way alleys do. Standing there, even for a moment, you feel how the city survives by borrowing energy wherever it can. Current becomes flour, pilgrimage becomes coin, ancient walls become foundations, old marble becomes new decoration, human habit becomes an institution when repeated often enough. This Rome is not a giant machine like the ancient city once was. It is a web of smaller continuities, each one vulnerable, each one stubborn. And because the day has already stretched far enough to make the body notice itself again, your awareness turns inward once more. The bench, the belt, the wool against the skin, the ache at the base of the neck, the dryness at the mouth, the film of city air over the face. There is no clean separation between the economy of the city and the economy of the body. One is always working through the other. You return from the market, not simply with provisions, but with the weight of the world carried in a cloth bag. The smell of fish and leather on your hands, and the knowledge that survival, here as everywhere, is made of hundreds of ordinary exchanges, stacked quietly on top of one another, until they resemble a life. By the later afternoon, the body becomes impossible to ignore. The city may still be moving with purpose, but you begin to feel your own edges more sharply. The tunic clings in places where sweat has dried. Your shoes, thin and practical, and not especially forgiving, have translated every uneven stone into a message for the soles of your feet. Smoke from the workshop or hearth seems to have settled into your hair and your throat. You rub at your neck, you adjust the ties that hold your hose, you become aware, in that mild and unromantic way that labouring people often do, of the body not as an object of admiration or even personal expression, but as a tool that is serviceable, tiring, and never fully out of demand. What you wear tells a stranger almost everything necessary. The fabric, the colour, the length, the condition of the seams, the quality of the belt, the cut of the shoe, the presence or absence of visible ornament. All of it can be read as easily as a written declaration by those accustomed to such things. Most people move through Rome in wool and linen, subdued by necessity into natural tones. Bright dyes cost money, fine cloth costs money, decorative detail costs money, and if you do have money, display must be calibrated carefully. Too little distinction leaves your status invisible. Too much invites envy, notice, and perhaps theft. Medieval prudence has its own sartorial wisdom. Cleanliness, too, belongs to the world of calibration rather than perfection. People wash, certainly. They do not live in deliberate filth. Hands and face are attended to. Cloth can be wiped, rinsed, beaten, aired, but the great public bathing world of antiquity has gone silent. Nobody in your neighbourhood expects the luxury of vast warm rooms, abundant running water, and communal bathing on an imperial scale. A basin, a cloth, some privacy, if fortunate, and patience are more realistic. The result is not an unwashed barbarism, as later centuries like to imagine, but a different standard of what counts as acceptably clean in a city where water is work and smoke is constant. Beneath all this ordinary bodily wear lies something heavier. Health in Rome is always partial, always uncertain, and always shared with danger. The headache that begins behind the eyes may be simple fatigue. It may be smoke, it may be poor water, it may be the first hint of fever. In this landscape, fever is not an event, but a season that never entirely leaves. Malaria haunts the region around the city with the persistence of a curse people half understand and half mythologize. They may speak of bad air rising from low ground or marshy margins, and while the explanation is not precise in the scientific sense, it is close enough to suffering to survive. Bodies in Rome learn compromise with repeated illness. A child who reaches adulthood has already passed through more invisible lotteries than a modern person can easily imagine. Fever, bowel disease, infected cuts, childbirth, winter lung complaints, summer exhaustion, bad food, contaminated water, and the simple fact that one accident can become fatal in a world without reliable intervention all shape the city's private history. People do not wander through the day in constant dramatic terror of this, because no one can live that way for long. Instead, danger is folded into expectation. Someone is always recovering, always weakening, always trying a remedy, always promising that the saint in question helped last time. The remedies themselves form a layered world. An herb woman in the district may know what to steep for stomach pain, what leaf cools a swelling, what bark eases a fever, what plant is better avoided when a pregnant woman asks for help. A more formally trained physician, if one can be reached and paid, speaks the language of all. Humours and balance, of heat and cold, dryness and excess. A monk or cleric attached to a religious house may bring written knowledge gathered from older authorities, from copied texts, from practical care, from the blending of medicine and prayer that the age finds entirely logical. A barber may handle blood, teeth, boils, and the rough craft of cutting where cutting is all that remains. None of these categories are purely foolish, and none are reliably enough. That is the truth of medicine in this city. Knowledge exists. Care exists, compassion exists, and also error exists everywhere. The body persists through a mixture of help, luck, inherited resilience, and prayer. You can almost feel the whole city living under that arrangement. People do not assume they will be preserved, they hope. Negotiate, mend, and go on. If the body becomes heavy, daily life knows what to do with heaviness. It draws inward toward the household. The later light takes on a warmer tone. Work slows from intensity into completion. People stop beginning tasks and start bringing them home. This simple change matters. A day can carry almost any burden if it is allowed to gather itself into evenings slowly enough. And Rome, for all its hardness, does know how to do that. The bells help, so do habit, hunger, and the reassuring sight of familiar thresholds drawing near again. The household at evening is its own kind of city, smaller, but no less structured by hierarchy, affection, weariness, and need. If the streets taught you how Rome survives outwardly, the room teaches you how it survives inwardly. Here are the people who absorb the day together. Here are the hands that turn ingredients into food, cloth into repair, children into future workers, and grief into endurance. Here are the negotiations that never appear in chronicles, but govern more of life than decrees ever will. A household may be led, in legal language, by a man whose authority appears clear enough on parchment. Yet parchment and lived reality are rarely identical things. The woman who manages food, stores, fuel, washing, mending, children, informal accounts, small exchanges with neighbours, and the practical timing of every domestic act, exercises a form of power, not always named as power by the legal world, but recognized by everyone who hopes to eat. Medieval documents tend to speak loudly in masculine voices. Daily life speaks more quietly and more truthfully. It knows whose labour holds the room together. Children move through that room, not as symbols of innocence, but as early participants in necessity. The very young cling, spill, plead, cry, laugh and sleep with complete commitment. The older ones fetch, carry, listen, imitate, and begin at astonishing speed to absorb the shape of adult expectations. There is little space for a prolonged in-between stage. Childhood is real, yes, but it narrows quickly under the pressure of labour, apprenticeship, and household demand. A girl may learn management by watching and doing before she could ever name the concept. A boy may learn trade rhythm from a bench long before he is physically ready for all it will ask of him. And over all of this hangs the quiet, brutal arithmetic of survival. Not every child lives. Not every mother recovers cleanly from childbirth. Not every fever passes. Not every winter is mild enough, nor every summer generous enough. People love one another under those conditions without ceasing to know how precarious that love is. Perhaps they love with even more urgency for that reason. Modern people sometimes imagine that frequent death must dull affection in the past, as though repetition teaches indifference. The opposite seems closer to the truth. Repetition teaches familiarity with loss, not freedom from it. Marriage, too, belongs to the practical imagination of the age. Families calculate, compare, negotiate and balance household interest against desire as best they can. Dowries matter because property matters, alliances matter because instability is never far away. Love appears certainly because human beings remain human in every century. But love does not always enjoy the privilege of being the first criterion. Still, daily tenderness can grow in arrangements that began as strategy. So can bitterness, so can loyalty, so can all the ordinary mixed weather of long shared life. Women move through the city in constrained ways, and yet are everywhere necessary within it. At market, at church, at the fountain, in the lanes between neighbours. In the transmission of knowledge that rarely enters official archives, they form networks of practical intelligence. One knows who is ill, another knows which herb actually worked, another knows which family is pretending not to be in trouble, another knows which priest can be approached when a matter must be softened before it becomes public. A widow may manage more than many men around her. A midwife may enter rooms no magistrate can enter and emerge carrying the newest truths of the district. A nun in a well-endowed house may handle texts and property with an autonomy unavailable to many married women. None of this cancels legal subordination. It complicates it, as you sit in the late light, watching the room settle toward evening. You begin to feel how much of civilization is made of invisible competence. Fire is kept at the right strength, bread is measured against tomorrow. A child's quarrel is cut short before it grows. A torn sleeve is turned in skilled fingers and made usable again. News from the street is sorted into what matters and what can wait. The day is translated into continuity. That translation is one of the household's miracles. Outside, the bells begin to gather the city inward. Not loudly, not urgently, but persistently, they remind every district that the day does not belong only to labour or chance. It belongs to a pattern. In Rome, time is not silent, it arrives with sound, and those sounds shape more than schedule. They shape expectation. They divide the day into known portions, manageable portions. Morning can be survived because noon will come. Noon can be survived because evening will come. Evening can be survived because prayer, food, darkness and sleep will eventually gather everything that has been scattered. This may be why the bells feel soothing even when they command. They make life feel held inside something larger than private worry. Whatever quarrels shake the towers, whatever bargains collapse in the market, whatever pain a body carries privately home, the hours continue to be named. The church in this city does not merely stand in certain places. It makes time itself audible, and because time is audible, evening has a texture as distinct as morning. The light thins, the room grows golden, and then brown. A candle may be lit carefully, because candles are not thrown away on carelessness. The meal for evening begins to send up its smell, richer perhaps than breakfast, because the day has allowed something to simmer. The body, which endured work, water, dust, and public life, feels the promise of sitting still. It is a small promise, but a deep one. The more difficult the day, the more sacred a bench beside a hearth can become. If you were to ask what truly governs Rome more completely than any noble family, and more quietly than any pope, the most honest answer might be this: the church calendar. Not only doctrine, not only buildings, not only priests, but the calendar itself. The hours are rung, the feasts recur, the fasts return, saints' days rise and pass, like markers on a path that everyone knows, even if not everyone could write them down. Time in Rome is not empty duration, waiting to be filled by activity. It is already textured, already interpreted, already given a sacred shape. You do not think of yourself as living on a numerical schedule. You live between bells, between offices, between preparations for holy days, between obligations of fasting and reliefs of feasting. A debt may be due by reference to a saint. A rent may be remembered by a feast. A market rhythm may bend around a vigil, a marriage, a burial, a baptism, a procession. All of it fits into a temporal architecture older and stronger than private preference. Even those who grumble at the church's demands still live inside the order it provides. One does not step outside it. There is no outside for ordinary people to step into. This becomes especially visible when pilgrims arrive, and they are arriving now in small but steady currents, as they do through most of the year. You notice them first by difference. Their clothing carries the road on it. Their faces look farther travelled than local faces. They hesitate at crossroads where locals turn without thinking. They look upward more often, toward towers, facades, relic signs, and church doors. Some come in groups with leaders or guides, some come in twos or threes, some come nearly alone, as if dragged toward Rome by a private vow strong enough to cross half a continent. The city receives them with a mixture that is almost impossible to separate into clean moral categories. It welcomes them because they are pious, because they prove the continuing gravity of Rome, because they fill churches with tears and candles and gratitude, and because they bring money. It also exploits them because strangers are exploitable, and because any city that survives partly on visitors develops a talent for turning sanctity into infrastructure. Inns, hostels, guides, stalls, tokens, relic displays, donations, recommended routes, trusted intermediaries, suspicious intermediaries. All of it gathers around the pilgrim economy like vines around a trellis. And at the centre of that economy lies the relic. Rome has so many that abundance itself begins to feel like a theological category. Bones, fragments, cloth, chains, vessels, saintly traces, holy residues, objects attached by story and devotion to those whose nearness to God is believed to persist beyond death. To a modern sceptical mind, this may appear at once moving and absurd. To the medieval pilgrim, it appears obvious. Holiness clings. Sacred proximity can linger. Matter itself may carry grace, if grace has once touched it deeply enough. Yet, the body of a saint does not become ordinary after burial. A fragment of a martyr's life does not cease to signify because flesh has turned to relic. So a chapel is entered, a reliquary is opened, Light catches silver, enamel, crystal, perhaps silk within. A priest's voice changes register. Pilgrims kneel, tears begin. One woman presses trembling fingers together as if trying to hold her hope in place. One man closes his eyes with the exhausted devotion of someone who has walked too long to remain guarded. The object itself may be small, even unimpressive in material terms. That hardly matters. The point is contact, not spectacle. Or rather, it is spectacle only insofar as spectacle helps open the heart to contact. Of course, even this world contains doubt. It would be foolish to imagine that medieval people never noticed how many saintly finger bones seemed to circulate through Christendom, or how readily new relics appeared when a church needed prestige. Fraud exists because belief exists. Competition exists because devotion and revenue are not strangers to one another. But doubt does not dissolve the system. It lives inside it. A local may privately raise an eyebrow and still kiss the reliquary. A cleric may question a provenance and still preach reverence. A pilgrim may not care whether every chain in every church can be proven to modern standards, if standing before one of them allows him to weep honestly for the first time in months. This is one of the great sleep-content gifts inside the story of Rome in 1200. Faith here is not thin. It is thick enough to shape streets, calendars, kitchens, economies, and tears. It gives texture to the city. It slows people. It draws them into chapels where candlelight trembles over old stone and the air feels held in a kind of waiting hush. Even when the practical mind notices the machinery behind the scene still works. That is the mystery of ritual. It can be organized and sincere at the same time. You stand for a moment in the edge of one such church, neither rushing fully in nor turning away. The smell of wax is warm. The voices are low. A pilgrim from somewhere north of the mountains sobs with gratitude before an object you cannot verify, and do not need to verify in order to understand the emotion itself. And in that moment, Rome seems to reveal its secret clearly. So it survives not because everything in it is pure, nor because everything in it is true in the narrowest sense, but because it still knows how to gather human longing into forms people can enter. Soon enough, though, even longing must watch the light. Dusk makes its own claims. Wonder has to find its way home before darkness turns the city from a place of reverence into a place of caution. So the church door opens again to the street, and outside the day has already begun lowering its voice. Dusk is where Rome shows its harder outline. By day, danger is mixed into ordinary life closely enough that one can almost forget it between errands. At evening, it clarifies, shadows lengthen in streets already narrow, corners become more private than they ought to be. The same tower that looked stately in morning light now feels watchful. The same lane that carried gossip and purchases now asks who else may be using it. A city without street lighting becomes a city of decisions. Which route is shortest? Which route is safest? Which household has already closed its door? Which district has grown tense this week? Practical knowledge is a survival art. The first thing modern people often miss about urban danger in the medieval world is that there is no clean, dividing line between public order and private force. Rome has authorities, certainly. It has courts, it has officials, it has church jurisdiction, civic claims, noble enforcement, neighbourhood loyalties, and every manner of overlapping competence. What it does not have is a simple, trustworthy mechanism that arrives when trouble does. There is no neutral force standing by to separate hot tempers from knives. There are only relationships, reputations, affiliations, and the hope that one is not in the wrong place when old memory decides to become new violence. And old memory does decide that often enough a shout in the wrong street can summon more than a shout in return. An insult can travel through kinship faster than reason. A quarrel may belong not to the two men presently facing each other, but to a family ledger running backward through slights. Alliances, inheritances, and injuries so entangled that no one under 40 remembers the original seed. If steel appears, it appears quickly. If clubs appear, they are already in hands made ready by habit. Violence, when it comes, is often brief, targeted, and disturbingly ordinary to those who live near it. Bystanders do not rush forward seeking justice as a principle. They step back, take cover, learn what they can, and wait for the street to decide whether it has finished. This does not mean Rome is permanently at war in every lane. That would make daily life impossible. It means rather that peace is local, negotiated, and reversible. One neighbourhood may feel settled while another grows sharp. One evening may pass under the sounds of song and dishes, the next under the sound of running feet. Ordinary people become experts not in abstract law, but in reading tension. They know when to cross the square and when to detour. They know which families can be greeted neutrally, which retainers should not be stared at, which windows conceal listeners, which taverns become unwise after dark. The curfew deepens all of this. As night arrives, the city does what pre-modern cities everywhere did. It contracts. Doors are barred, fires are watched. Those who remain outside do so with a reason, a risk, or both. Night watchmen may exist, yes, moving with torches and staffs, and varying degrees of seriousness, but no one mistakes them for an all-seeing order. Their presence is reassurance only in proportion. A moving light tells you someone is there. It does not tell you what he will do if the wrong man emerges from the wrong archway. Still, a little reassurance is better than none in darkness. Even the smallest order matters, and yet Rome does not become empty. Before full curfew, taverns gather those who can afford a cup and a pause. The warmth inside such places is not refined, but it is humanly generous. Wine, rough benches, smoke, stories, arguments, songs only half in tune, dice rattling against wood, all create a kind of informal evening life that the church distrusts for reasons understandable to anyone who has watched men become louder as cups become lighter. Still, the tavern offers what many hard lives require, a room where the body can unwind without immediately going to sleep, where the social weight of the day can be dispersed through complaint, laughter, exaggeration, and song. It is possible to sit there for a little while and feel almost sheltered from history. A musician plucks at a stringed instrument with more sincerity than polish. An old man retells a miracle story that has almost certainly grown more generous with each passing week. Someone loses at dice and claims the saints have taken sides. Someone else replies that the saints have better things to do than watch fools gamble. Laughter moves around the room like a slow flame catching. For a brief time, the city feels not haunted or degraded or politically dangerous, but simply alive in the ordinary evening way that all cities, at their best, manage to be. Then you step back out, because no sensible person lingers too long between torchlight and full dark. And there, under a rising moon, or under a cloud-dim sky, one of the old monumental ruins may suddenly confront you with its altered meaning. The great amphitheatre we call the Colosseum is no neat site of preserved knowledge here. It is a broken giant. Its walls are torn, its arches dark, its uses changed, its memory blurred into legend. Families have occupied parts of it. The city has taken stone from it. The people around it tell stories about what it once was, but those stories do not line up neatly with historical truth. The past has become half myth, half construction material. That is perhaps why the ruin feels so powerful at night. It does not present itself as a lesson, it presents itself as a presence. It is too large to ignore, too damaged to trust, too old to understand completely, and too woven into present life to be merely admired. Looking at it in moonlight, you do not feel like a tourist visiting antiquity. You feel like a resident passing a huge sleeping animal whose earlier life is no longer entirely recoverable. Soon enough, caution wins over wonder. It always does after dark. You turn homeward. The wise part of the evening is not the part that proves bravery in the streets. The wise part is the part that ends behind a door with a bar across it, where the city's outer unpredictability can be reduced, if only for a few hours, to distant sound. Indoors, the change is immediate and profound. The city does not disappear, but it is reduced to what can be heard through wood, shutters, and masonry. A bark, a hoofbeat, a distant call. The rest of the world withdraws behind the small kingdom of the room. Supper waits in practical form, likely a pot that has deepened in flavour through the day, rather than a meal assembled theatrically at the last moment. Soup, stew, softened vegetables, beans, onion, perhaps a little fish, if the calendar permits or the market rewarded patience, and always bread once more to thicken, carry, and complete. The meal is not lavish, but evening hunger lends a grace to simplicity that luxury rarely understands. This is one of the quieter gifts of pre-modern life, though it comes bound up with hardship. Appetite is honest here. Food is welcome in a clean, uncomplicated way. A bowl warms the hands, steam rises the body, having spent itself in pieces all day, comes back into coherence over a table. Children yawn before they mean to. Someone mends while listening. Someone else tells a piece of neighbourhood news, too small to merit daylight, but exactly the right size for evening. The household becomes less a hierarchy than a shared climate of tiredness. And because tiredness makes people truthful, the room often reveals more of itself at this hour than at any other. The grandmother's hands continue to move over cloth long after her eyes would prefer to close. A child leans against a shoulder and is gently repositioned nearer the pallet. A woman counts in her head what remains of flour or oil or patience. An apprentice pretends not to be nearly asleep. There is no separate chamber to which life's untidy parts may be politely hidden. Everything coexists: rest, work, care, irritation, affection, coughs, small smells, wool, ash, spooning against bowl. The intimacy would overwhelm many modern sensibilities. Here it is simply normal. In such a room prayer makes particular sense. Not grand liturgical prayer now, though the forms of the church linger inside every gesture, but household prayer, personal prayer, the last words carried upward before sleep. Medieval faith is not an accessory added to life. It is the atmosphere in which life is interpreted. A headache, a safe return home, a good loaf, a recovered child, a flood survived, an illness endured, a bargain completed. All of it exists inside a universe thick with divine significance. God is not remote in the modern secular sense. God is immediate. The saints are immediate. Hell is immediate. Mercy is immediate, so kneeling by a bed or fire at day's end does not feel like stepping into a separate religious zone. It feels like naming aloud the reality one already inhabits. Confession, penance, miracles, intercession, divine judgment. All of these form part of a mental world that may seem severe from the outside, but from within it can be strangely consoling. One's failures are real, yes, but so is absolution. Suffering is real, yes, but so is the possibility that suffering may mean something, may be accompanied, may even be relieved by a saint whose relic lies only a few streets away. The modern mind often asks first whether such things are factually true in a provable way. The medieval mind often asks first whether they are spiritually real in the texture of lived experience. That difference matters. It changes the use of the world. And then there is beauty. Even in a city of patched walls and practical poverty, beauty is not absent. It is being made, often quite literally, in churches that rise from old foundations and from older materials. Somewhere not far off, work may continue by torchlight on a church floor, an altar screen, a wall inset with precious fragments. The craftsmen who lay coloured stone and glass into patient geometric order are doing more than decoration. They are translating ruin into radiance. Ancient marble is cut, reset, ordered, and framed until what was once imperial or pagan or merely abandoned becomes part of a Christian surface that catches light with astonishing tenderness. Rome knows how to do this, perhaps better than any city in its age. It takes the leftovers of past grandeur and recomposes them into a new sacred language. Columns from forgotten buildings now divide church aisles. Marble, once walked on by bureaucrats or senators, now glows beneath candlelight near the altar. Gold-backed tesserae in apses scatter warm illumination over Christ, saints, vines, stars, and heavenly order. These interiors do not deny the city's poverty or disorder. They answer them. They say that beauty can still be made out of fragments. They say that continuity need not look triumphant in order to be real. This matters because the residents of Rome do not live only among decay. They live among transformations. The city is not merely crumbling, it is also reassembling itself. Stone by stone, prayer by prayer, floor by floor, procession by procession, the Christian medieval city makes use of what the ancient city left behind, and in doing so creates spaces where even a tired labourer may step in from a muddy street and stand under a mosaic that seems to open a patch of heaven above him. Back in the room, the candle shortens, talk decreases, beds are not so much prepared as reclaimed from the activities that occupied the room before. A child is carried or nudged, a blanket is shaken out, shoes are placed where they may be found at dawn. The door bar is checked again, because one can never be too sure, and certainty is too expensive to purchase in any other form. The fire settles toward ember. Outside, night takes fuller possession of the city, but inside, a different kind of possession has begun. Quiet fills the room not as emptiness, but as rest gathering itself. Before sleep fully takes you, the mind often widens. It leaves the room without leaving the bed. It travels not into action, but into scale. Beyond these lanes and churches and towers, there is the Campagna, the broad countryside around Rome, and thinking of it changes the city. Within the walls, life feels cramped and layered beyond them. It opens into distances, marked less by crowds than by emptiness, pasture, ruin, and the uneasy authority of landscape. The walls themselves are one of the city's great inheritances. They still encircle more than the living population actually needs, enclosing not only dense habitation, but stretches of land where gardens, fields, animals, broken structures, and silence coexist in the same old imperial embrace. To pass through a gate is to feel a threshold in the body. Inside, bells, neighbours, church, market, oversight. Outside, space, weather, and a much older loneliness. The roads lead outward still, of course, because roads, once made with Roman seriousness, can continue shaping movement long after the empire that made them has been forgotten in all but name. But the countryside, those roads now pass through, is not the meticulously peopled agricultural skin of a vast capital. It is thinner, rougher, and more haunted, Ruined villas lie amid grass that rises around old walls and foundations. Broken aqueducts stretches across the land, like the exposed ribs of extinct animals. Here and there a fortified settlement clings to a rise, because people trust height and stone more than openness. Herds move where populations once concentrated. Marshy ground breeds fever. In summer especially, the lowlands and river margins carry the invisible threat that city people summarize as bad air. The Campagna feeds Rome and threatens it at the same time. Cattle, sheep, grain, and cheese depend on it. Malaria, isolation, and uncertainty also emerge from it. Beauty and danger are not separate categories out there. They wear the same light. This is where Rome's strange position becomes clearest. It is at once diminished and central, smaller than its memory. Yes, but still the place toward which roads, pilgrims, documents, hopes and fears continue to converge. The countryside around it feels almost post-imperial, in a way no resident would phrase, but many would sense. So much space for so few people, so many traces of systems no longer maintained, so many signs that history has receded, and yet left its material weight behind. You could imagine, from the right hillside, that the world had not entirely decided whether to continue. Perhaps that uncertainty is why talk of endings finds such ready soil here. Sit long enough on a bench after nightfall, with neighbours whose wine has loosened both worry and speculation, and the conversation may drift from grain prices to the fate of the soul, from local feuds to the destiny of Christendom, from tomorrow's tasks to the possibility that history itself is nearing its appointed close. This does not happen because medieval people were uniquely irrational. It happens because they lived in a symbolic world where signs mattered. Text mattered, catastrophe mattered, and divine chronology was not a poetic extra but a real horizon. The book of Revelation is not a strange appendix to life. It is part of the emotional weather. Wars can look like prophecy. Heresy can look like prophecy. Flood, famine, earthquake, plague, eclipse, all can be read as signs. News from the Holy Land arrives carrying the heat of crusade and loss. Rumours multiply, because rumour is what fills the space where mass communication will one day be. A preacher speaks with urgency, a local visionary claims a dream, a monk's writings circulate from region to region, dividing history into ages and hinting that the next turning may be closer than people think. Whether one accepts these systems fully or only absorbs their atmosphere, they shape the air around ordinary conversation. And yet, the most human part of such end times talk is how often it ends by returning to practical life. The world may be nearing judgment. Yes, the Antichrist may be discussed with great seriousness under stars. No electric light can compete with. A crusade may be forming. A great holy year may be imagined. A pope may be reorganizing vast spiritual authority. Still, the bread must be baked tomorrow, the leather must be cut, the child must be dressed, the water must be hauled, the bells will ring, whether the world is ending or not. That is the hidden wisdom of Rome in 1200. Apocalyptic imagination lives beside ordinary persistence and does not cancel it. People can fear the end and still prepare breakfast. They can speak of cosmic struggle and still mend a sleeve. They can believe fully in heaven, hell, purgatory, miracles, and the possibility that history is tilting toward final reckoning, and still complain that the fish was too expensive at market. This is not hypocrisy, it is integration. Life is allowed to be total. The sacred and the practical do not occupy different compartments. They lie side by side like tools in a drawer. As you imagine the stars over the small square, you can almost hear such a conversation fading. One neighbour grows heated over prophecy, another shrugs and says perhaps, but tomorrow is still market day. A third says nothing for a while, and simply looks up. The sky in this age is fuller than most modern people have ever seen. Without city glare, the stars do not ornament the dark. They dominate it. The Milky Way is not a concept, but a visible fact. Constellations look near enough to guide not only sailors, but thoughts. Under such a sky, it becomes easier to believe that the world is patterned, that time is meaningful, that history is headed somewhere. And perhaps that is the softest way to understand the city. Rome is not surviving because it solved all its contradictions. It is surviving because people keep repeating life within them. Habit, prayer, labour, memory, bells, bread, caution, wonder, all of these are enough to carry one day into the next. Greatness, in the ancient sense, may have departed. Continuity, in the human sense, has not, and continuity is sometimes the more impressive achievement. The room around you has now gone quiet enough that each small sound stands alone. A child's sleepy breath, a board settling, a coal shifting to red, and then darker red, far away. Perhaps from some church tower or monastic house. A bell marks an hour for those still awake in service, while the city rests. But that bell is not demanding anything from you. Your work is finished. Your choices are reduced at last to the simplest and kindest one, to stop carrying the day. You lie back, and let the day return in smaller pieces now, no longer as tasks to be done, but as impressions loosening themselves from effort. The straw beneath you has its own sound, a dry faint whisper whenever you shift. The wool blanket, heavy but trustworthy, settles over the body with the seriousness of something made to last rather than charm. The room has become almost fully dark, except for the softest pulse from the dying hearth, and this changes the scale of everything. In daylight, the walls are close. At night, the dark makes them feel farther away, as if the room expands just enough to let the mind rest. You can still think, if you want, of the whole day from waking to now. The narrow alley, the first bell, the smell of smoke mixed with morning damp, the towered skyline rising where an imperial skyline might once have been imagined. The church floor worn by generations of feet, the priest's familiar face, bread dense enough to anchor a morning, water drawn hand over hand from a well, because the old grand systems no longer serve as they once did. Workbench, knife, leather, thread, repetition, market voices, river light, the slow turning of mills, the body's quiet complaints. The household gathered again at evening, pilgrims kneeling before a relic with hope too strong to be embarrassed by tears. Moon on old stone, a city remembering and forgetting itself at the same time. This is where the hidden tenderness of the story reveals itself. Rome in 1200 is difficult almost everywhere you touch it. It is uncomfortable, unsanitary, politically unstable, physically demanding, spiritually serious, medically risky, and full of losses, so ordinary that no one pauses to call them tragedies each time they occur. But difficulty is not the whole texture of life. It never is in any century. There is also habit, there is local affection, there is the comfort of being known by name, there is skill, there is a bowl of warm food in the evening, there is the relief of a bolted door, there is the beauty of a mosaic over an altar, there is a song in a tavern, there is a saint's feast to look forward to, there is the sound of bells making time feel shareable, there is a river that can look beautiful for one exact minute before it remembers to be dangerous again. People in this city are not living inside a lesson about decline. They are living inside their own present. That present contains ruins only because ruins are what the world already had in place when they arrived. They do not move through the day marvelling that they are surrounded by the remains of greatness. They move through the day using what is available, fearing what is practical to fear, honouring what they have been taught to honour, and making meanings sturdy enough to carry a life. In that sense, they are not alien to you at all. They are only earlier. The forms differ. The need does not. Perhaps that is why the city becomes softer as you think about it from bed. The harsher edges of the day lose some of their sharpness once no action is required. The street fight becomes only a memory of fast movement, and then gone. The market's noise fades into a harmless hum. The relic becomes less a question of authenticity and more a scene of sincere longing under candlelight. The dark outside the window no longer asks where you should step next. It has become simply night, and night in this age is thick in a way modern darkness rarely is. There are no distant engines, no electric glare pushing back the sky, no steady artificial buzz. The city is alive out there. Yes, but it is alive quietly now in interrupted ways. A cough from another room, a dog marking some private discovery in the lane, the faint rush or murmur of the river beyond stone, bridges and sleeping quarters. Wood shrinking. As temperatures drop, somewhere perhaps, a late traveller and the measured answer of a watchman. The dark leaves each sound more alone, and because each sound is more alone, the silence between them grows deeper. If you listen long enough, the river begins to dominate the imagination, not because it is loud, but because it is continuous. The Tiber is still moving, whether anyone listens or not. It moved before the medieval houses leaned over these streets. It moved while emperors still crossed marble courts. It moved through sieges, floods, plague, years, market days, feast days, processions, fires, repairs, births, baptisms, bargains, and burials. It moves now. It will move tomorrow. It does not hurry. It does not forget. It does not explain itself. In that way, it may be the most patient thing in Rome. The bells, too, belong to that patience. They have rung all day not to startle, but to place the hours gently where they belong. Dawn, prime, noon, evening, the final call toward night. Tomorrow they will begin again, and everyone who survives the night will be received by them once more into the pattern. There is tremendous comfort in repetition, when repetition is kindly enough arranged. A city can be harsh, and still offer, this Rome does, so now the day is done in the only way days have ever truly ended. Not with a conclusion stamped on it, not with a perfect understanding of what it all meant, but with the body giving over its questions for a little while. You do not need to solve the city. You do not need to measure the truth of every relic, trace every family feud, count every church, explain every flood, or remember every ancient name buried in reused stone. Tonight none of that is required. Tonight the work of the day is allowed to dissolve back into darkness. The household is sleeping, the door is barred, the fire is nearly ash. Whatever waits in the world beyond this room can wait until morning. Let that be enough. Let the room become simpler and softer. Let the blanket mean exactly what it means. Let the dark be only dark. Let the city's history withdraw from you until it is no heavier than distant water and the memory of bells. If the world ends some day, it is not ending in this moment. If Rome changes again, it will not ask anything more from you tonight. For now there is only rest, and the deep old city outside keeping its own watch in silence. And because the story has carried you this far, all the way from the first grey slit of dawn to the deepest part of the Roman night, you can let the last remaining images grow lighter now, as though they are being covered, one by a soft layer of darkness. The towers no longer need to stand sharply in the mind. The market can empty itself. The church door can close. The relic can return to its silver quiet. The river can keep turning mills without your attention. Even the ruins can be left to their own moonlit patience. They have been here a very long time. They do not need to be watched. What remains, if anything remains, is not information but feeling. The feeling of a city still alive after its grandest age has passed. The feeling of bells travelling over roofs. The feeling of stone under hand, bread in the palm, smoke in cloth, dusk in a lane, firelight on a rough wall. The feeling that people have gone on living not because life became easy, but because the next hour arrived and they stepped into it, and then the next, and then the next. There is something deeply soothing in that. Once the day's difficulties no longer press directly against the skin. Human beings continue, streets continue, prayers continue, morning returns, even among broken systems and uncertain futures. Continuation itself becomes a kind of mercy. Perhaps that is why this Rome, for all its discomfort, can feel unexpectedly intimate from a distance. It is stripped of some illusions. It does not flatter human control. It reminds you that cities are not permanent in the way their builders hope. That splendor can become rubble, that order can fray, that memory can blur. But it also reminds you that lives do not require perfection in order to be complete. They require rhythms, a place to sleep, hands to work, someone who knows your name, a little food, a way to mark the hours, something or someone to trust when fear rises, a story large enough to hold suffering without making suffering the only truth. Medieval Rome, for all the things it lacks, still has those. That is no small thing, so if your mind wants one final walk before it sleeps, let it be a slow and harmless one. Let it pass once more down the narrow lane where the upper stories nearly meet above you. Let it cross a little square where a fountain murmurs into stone. Let it pause inside a church where candlelight breathes against old gold. Let it drift through a workshop that smells of leather and wax. Let it stand for a moment on the riverbank while water works at wood, rope and shadow. Let it look up at a torn old wall of the amphitheatre and feel not fear but distance, the peaceful distance of time itself. Let it return to the room at last, where the household sleeps and the last ember glows like a star that has come indoors. Nothing in that room needs improving tonight, not the floor, not the blanket, not the silence, not the life attached to them. You are not here to rescue the city from history, and history is not here to demand anything more of you. The only thing being asked now is gentleness, gentleness toward the day you have just carried in your imagination, gentleness toward the people who moved through it with more courage than ceremony, gentleness toward yourself wherever and whenever you happen to be listening from. Soon, perhaps very soon, the first monks in some church or monastery will stir for the deep office of the night. Their voices will rise before dawn while most of the city still sleeps. They will pray through darkness in Latin. You need not follow. They will keep one small human thread of attention tied to heaven while labourers, widows, children, priests, travellers, artisans and animals all rest for a few more hours. That too is part of Rome. Someone is always awake. Someone is always ringing. Someone is always keeping the pattern alive long enough for others to lay it down for a while. But you do not need to be that person tonight. You do not need to hold the line between midnight and dawn. You do not need to stand watch at a tower, tend a mill, copy a manuscript, stir a pot, hear a confession, ferry a pilgrim, guard a bridge, carry water, or rise before first light. All of those things belong to another room, another century, another life. Yours, for this moment, belongs to rest. So let the city recede until it is no more than a soft arrangement of sounds somewhere far away. Let the Tiber become only a low, unending murmur in the dark. Let the bells become memory rather than signal. Let the wool blanket, whether real or imagined, settle with its full quiet weight over shoulders and chest. Let the breathing slow. Let the thoughts thin and lengthen and lose their need to become conclusions. Tomorrow, in Rome, bread will be broken again, doors will open. Priests will cough and clear their throats before Mass. Apprentices will yawn over tools. Women will gather at wells and fountains. Pilgrims will arrive with hope in their hands. Merchants will argue. Children will run. A watchman who slept badly will complain. The river will still be there, patient as ever. The city will continue its improbable work of being itself. Crumbling, holy, suspicious, beautiful, hungry, stubbornly alive. It does not need your help to do that tonight. And for you, there is no tomorrow yet. There is only this last gentle stretch of quiet, in which the mind no longer has to walk the streets, and the body no longer has to answer the bells, and the dark can be trusted to remain only dark. Sleep can come now, without missing anything important. The city will still be there when morning returns. The towers will still stand. The churches will still ring. The old stones will still hold the warmth or chill of the hour. Nothing essential will be lost if you let go. So let go. Let Rome fade into softness. Let the water keep its own time. Let the bells wait and sleep well, while the eternal city, small and tired and magnificent, in its own ruined way, keeps watch somewhere beyond the edge of dreaming.